Welcome to What Drives Us One-on-One. My name is Russell Frost. I am your host, and I have with me the illustrious, the legendary John Voelcker. John Voelcker has written for every major auto media organization. Is that fair, John?
I'm still waiting for Motor Trend.
No Motor Trend. Okay. Okay. Almost every major and has written for many other major media publications about cars, sustainable energy, the environment. I mean, needless to say, John's reputation speaks for itself. So, hi, John. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Russ. Thank you for having me. I just reorganized my screen so that I'm actually looking at you in the center of the screen, right at the camera, instead of it's little things that make the difference.
Zoom is good, but not perfect by any means. And I had problems with the focus thing too. It was really weird. I don't know why.
There we go. I realized I could make it so I'm on the bottom where I can't see me. Much better.
Very good, very good. So I don't have an agenda for this show, John, because the times when we've done like Transport Treehouse or you've been on What Drives Us, we have no problems filling time chatting about stuff. I mean, you're kind of in the very best way all over the place. You know, you don't have one narrow beat. You're not covering Silicon Valley technology, for instance. You're following your Twitter feed is like, okay, what's John driving this time? It's a truck. It's a Fiat. It's a what? So,
well, that comes really from, I have sort of two hats. I cover EVs, which is where my interest is, and which was in retrospect, I think a fairly good decision 15 years ago to sort of focus in on that thing back when, in the famous words of one of our colleagues who shall remain nameless, the only people who care about those things are smelly hippies. So that's the EV thing, and that's gotten more and bigger and more extensive and more interesting and more global. But then simultaneously, I'm a juror on the North American Car and Truck of the Year Awards, which you may have seen. There's a little sort of medallion in some people's ads saying this new vehicle was judged to be North American Car or Truck or Utility Vehicle of the Year. And so I drive pretty much every new vehicle that goes on the market. And I do my voting in the same series as the other 50 jurors. But it's good because it keeps me up to what cars are. Everything is honing in on a perfectly predictable compact crossover.
Oh, God. I wish there was something we could do to stem the tide of enormous white trucks and big SUVs.
Why do you hate America, Russell?
Because I'm a socialist, communist, evil doer. Yeah.
The first thing in addressing a problem is to recognize that you have it. My apologies for video going in and out. Occasionally I freeze, so I just stop and restart.
Your audio is perfect. So.
Oh, good. This is the disadvantage of being at the very, very, very end of a very long cable run up a private road. So once in a while the cable hiccups. Anyway, so that's why you see the Fiats and this really remorseless collection of small crossovers, with occasionally more interesting things like Volkswagen ID4s and Audi e-tron Sportbacks and whatnot. So
it is. You know what? Since you brought it up, and I was going to head in a different direction right away, but this is like I'm on the road 40 hours a week, driving around my county. So I'm constantly mixing all day long with the traffic. And this whole trend, this whole movement of this like lemming-like rush to buy the biggest thing we can. I see more Chevy Traverses in the last few months than I can recall seeing in the entire history of that vehicle. And it's just bigger and uglier. And
well, I was informed, actually, I don't have kids, so I'm not the right person to be talking really about this, but I was informed by a colleague that if you're a good suburban family that will end up with 2.4 children in a slightly above average income suburb, you can have one child and get away with a compact crossover that has a mere 5 seats. But as soon as you get child number 2, you must buy a 3-row crossover. Otherwise, you will be shunned by the rest of the neighborhood and all the other parents who feel you will be incapable of doing your duties of hauling around above average children and their gear.
All the more reason to reject that, right?
I'm just not going to go there because I will be vilified by 40 million parents who are never wrong. But
vilify me.
Yeah, well, I think the parents will not be as effective as the Tesla fanboys, but we'll get to that later.
We certainly will.
What's interesting, though, about the evolution of cars into trucks, when NHTSA wrote its standards 50 years ago now, basically, to define vehicle classes, there were cars, which we all drove, and they were sedans or wagons or coupes or occasionally sports cars. But then there was this other category, fairly low volume, of what was deemed essentially agricultural equipment. And those were light-duty trucks. And they were separated out by several factors. They had to have all-wheel drive available. They had to have a flat load bed. They had to have certain approach departure angles and a certain height off the road. And that was what defined a light-duty truck, because the idea of a nice suburban mom driving Justin and Jennifer to soccer practice in a 2-ton, 18-foot-long dual cab pickup truck was absolutely unthinkable. That was not the society we lived in. But then came the SUV, and as has been covered, SUVs were great for car makers because initially they were just adapted like truck chassis, but they were incredibly profitable, more profitable than cars, in part because they needed less safety equipment and people expected fewer gadgets, fewer luxury features. Now, of course, we have King Ranch F-150s that sticker at over $100,000 to the glee of the automakers and their accountants. But for the moment, the first wave of SUVs was relatively primitive, relatively truck-based, got horrible gas mileage because they were truck-based. But people, including my mother, who is now 4'10", loved them because they sat higher.
My mom feels the same way about SUVs. She loves SUVs because she sits up higher.
Exactly. And there was a great study, traffic study, this is going back 10 or 15 years now, out of all places, the University of Texas, the home of the pickup truck.
Right.
That showed that when you have this mix of traffic between tall vehicles and short vehicles, it reduces throughput. The tall vehicles sit on your ass if you're in a car because they can see 2 or 3 ahead of you, but the driver in the shorter vehicle stays way back because he can't see through you at all. And that only used to be the case with, the odd white box van or something that was doing actual commercial work, not the 2.5 million pickup trucks a year being sold largely for personal usage. So in the end, what we've done is not only made traffic slower by having these tall vehicles, but we've gotten to the point where everybody now drives what is, by definition, a light truck, because a lot of people don't know their Toyota RAV4 definitionally is a light truck. This, however, is my segue into EVs, because I think what are being called compact crossover EVs are actually, by and large, passenger cars. And because physics is a harsh and demanding mistress, they tend to be lower and a lot more aerodynamic, even if they're styled as crossovers. They have all-wheel drive available, which I, for one, think is a requirement for a crossover, never mind the marketers from GM and so forth. And I think what will happen is that all of a sudden people will say, oh yeah, I got a Volkswagen electric crossover, or a Hyundai, or a Kia, or a Tesla, or whatever. And many of them will in fact be a lot lower than crossovers, or lower enough where maybe the arms race will start to end or start to adjust down. I hope, by the end of my lifetime.
I hate to espouse a negative opinion, but it's sort of my raison d'etre, yeah, right. Russell, you, but I don't see what's going to stem the multiple decade trend of Bigger is safer. Bigger is better. You need 3 rows, even if you have 1.4 kids, not 2 kids yet. You have a dog, but it's a mini poodle. Well, I still need a huge back area. I don't think until gas prices get goosed again are we going to see it. And, because of the up and down, because of the weird sort of, I don't want to say artificial, because all gas prices are artificial, right? There's no natural gas price. It's either subsidized or it's not, or it's, but until we see $4 or $5, $6 a gallon gas, people with big vehicles don't care.
And I'm not even convinced that they would at that point, because those big vehicles got a lot better fuel economy
than they used to.
Cafe,
right?
Than they did. It was not uncommon in 2000 to buy a 3-row crossover that gave you 14 miles a gallon. Now that same 3-row crossover is into the 20s, which is actually a lot less gasoline in gallons that you have to buy. And I happen to be test driving a Honda Civic right now. I'm getting 38 or 39 miles a gallon, and I'm not babying it. It's, it has a CVT, which is not terribly Civic-like, but otherwise it's perfectly nice, rather large, compact sedan. And 38 miles a gallon is actually really pretty good.
For an ICE car, that's amazing.
Yeah, this isn't a hybrid or anything.
Right.
And the hybrid thing is another topic we can deal with another day. But
yeah,
the EV market, and especially this whole crossover thing, is interesting because for 10 years we've had electric vehicles of various sorts that are either Teslas, which are their own thing, or they are small, compact hatchbacks with less range. And that's all very nice, and the early adopters were willing to go to all sorts of extraordinary lengths they will tell their grandchildren about to drive an electric car. Great. They were not center of the market for most Americans, which is these days one of 3 types of vehicles: compact crossover, mid-sized 3-row crossover, or pickup truck. I mean, that is the bulk of the market, and that share is rising. Yeah. Whether or not we like it doesn't matter. Go ahead.
I know. I was going to say I want to counter one thing you said. You were talking maybe the price. I know, right? How can I argue with you? You were talking about the price of the gallon of gas not necessarily being not putting people off of larger cars. And I'm going to say that it's not the price of the gallon of gas that's going to put people off. I remember the last time gas jumped and people whined about it incessantly, and it was almost never gas is X dollars a gallon. It cost me $75 to fill my tank. It's sort of like that. People don't care what the car costs. It's what the payment is.
Yeah.
Which is why we're seeing longer and longer loans to keep that payment down.
96-month car loans. Yay. I think that's entirely true. And I had it put to me once by a man who spends way more time with statistics than I hope I ever will, that it's not so much the absolute level of gas prices, it's the volatility and speed of the change.
Oh, interesting.
If, in fact, you have been paying $3 a gallon for 2 years, and then you drive in and it's $4.50 a gallon, you will scream bloody murder. If it goes up 3 cents every fill up for 2 years, you won't notice, you won't scream. It's the lobster in boiling water thing. It's also, though, size of the fill up, and there's this interesting dance going on where I've been surprised to drive some smaller cars that through much better gas mileage, well into the 30s in sort of daily usage, only have 10-gallon tanks,
right?
Which is actually kind of a shock because, all right, I've driven it, how long have I driven? I've driven it 400 miles or something. I drive in, and actually my fill up is $30 or less. I'm in New York State where gas is more expensive than average. It's so the cost of the fill up may be slightly eroded. On the other hand, I don't know what it takes to fill up a, say, heavy duty 2500 diesel all-wheel drive pickup truck. So
I don't know. So let's talk about electric vehicles. something
Fire
we
away.
both love. I want to not start with the T word. So
Telephone? Tag?
close.
Telegraph? No.
Telegram?
Telex?
Tachometer? No.
Piedmont?
I just, what's exciting? What have you driven lately that there's so much new stuff coming out?
Yeah.
That we're seeing more and more of. And for those of us, like you said, 15 years ago, you chose to kind of go down the EV path. 15 years ago, I kind of did that same thing. And we're finally seeing a diversity in the market. We're seeing multiple manufacturers, not just kind of here and there, compliance vehicles. We're starting, I think, just a little bits. We're nibbling away at the mainstream.
I think what's changed now, and I was on a panel about this earlier in the year, is that even compared to 18 months ago, it's clear that the change is happening. It is going to come, and the pace is actually accelerating. You have, 2 years ago, GM had just started to talk about what it hoped to do in electric cars, and everybody said, yeah, right, whatever. Volkswagen had its first set of goals, and everybody sort of said, yeah, well, they have to recover from Dieselgate, so they had to do something. And Ford was basically nowhere. And Tesla was Tesla, and it 2 years ago had the same suite of models that it has today. I actually went and looked, and I had forgotten that the Model the Model 3 has now been on sale for the 4 years, I think it is now.
Right.
And the Model Y snuck into the market very quietly over a year ago. So, they have these 4 cars. The latter 2, the 3 and the Y, are really the bulk of their volume. But Tesla was doing its thing. Everybody knew electric cars and Teslas. But now, as we sit here in the summer of 2021, you have, in terms of not compact hatchbacks, but crossovers with all-wheel drive, you have the Model Y, which came first, the Mach-E, which came into the market last December and is doing surprisingly well. Apparently, Ford has been quite surprised by the demand for the thing. I was amused that they made more electric Mustangs than they made conventional Mustangs in some month recently. I saw the headline. And then you have the Volkswagen ID4. And that one's on my mind because I'm in the middle of a very delayed review for the thing. The summary of which, after I really thought about it for a while, is that sometimes a car is more than the sum of its parts. And the ID4 is not top of class in any given metric for electric cars. It doesn't have the most cargo space. It certainly doesn't have the best charging network for road trips. It's not particularly efficient, given its EPA-rated range divided by its battery size. It has some wacky controls. And certainly...
It's a Volkswagen.
Well, it's sort of halfway between Tesla and, say, Hyundai.
Ooh.
And certainly it had early software problems. And yet, I put something like 700 miles on the thing. I charged it in a variety of places. I have tweeted enough about my experience with Electrify America that we'll just let that one slide. But overall, I like the ID4 more than I thought I was going to when I gave it back. I don't know if it's just my kind of car, but it was enjoyable to drive. It was fairly intuitive once you got over a couple of true weirdnesses, like why would you put in only 2 window switches with a toggle to switch them from front to rear? How expensive really are the extra 2 window switches?
Right.
But I'm sure there is a very long word in German that explains why that's a better way to do it. But in the end, I think the ID4 is going to be an important car because it's the first legit compact crossover, or as I call it, station wagon, really kind of meets the 250 miles of rated range, which is going to be less in the winter at speed, etc. Good cargo space. I loaded it. What did I put a dresser in it or something that I had to deliver to someone. You know, it had to work for its living. And so it's, you know, good seat room, comfortable to drive, pleasant to drive, not incredibly fast, but fast enough where you didn't feel it was a drag. You just weren't getting sort of punch you in the back acceleration. And overall, again, and I've been trying to sort through this for myself for several weeks to write this thing, because I have sort of happy memories of the thing, even though, you know, there's nothing outstanding about it. And that's a weird thing, especially for a first product from a company that hadn't made a car like this. I think it's good. It will be followed shortly. We've got the Mach-E, Model Y, ID4 came. It will be followed this fall by the Hyundai Ioniq 5. Next spring, we will have the Kia EV6. Cool looking car, stupid name. And what else do we have? We'll have the Audi Q4 e-tron. Same guts as the ID4, but Audi on top. You will have an unnamed compact crossover from Chevy that they probably won't talk about till next year. And there is I wrote down the whole list at some point. There are a couple of others as well coming. You may have them top of mind, I'm not sure. But all of a sudden, we're going to have half a dozen or more compact crossovers with ranges of 250-ish miles. That's a good thing. Because all of a sudden, those people who will never drive a hatchback will, you know, be perfectly willing to drive the same car if it's a little higher and has all-wheel drive and it's called a crossover. So, you know, I think it's good for EV adoption, because one of the main problems was a lot of people are open to EVs, and that number actually rises. There is a study coming out tomorrow or Thursday that says that, in fact, even in 1 year, between 2020 and 2021, the interest in and favorable view of EVs has risen among new car purchasers. The naysayers are still very much not interested, never work, don't tell me about EVs. But among the rest of it, there are fewer sort of on the fence or don't knows, and more, I'm willing to think about it, I'm willing to learn, I might be interested. And that's encouraging.
It's interesting. I had a conversation with a couple of people the other day, and I was kind of staggered. I mean, by two of the people involved in the conversation, one of whom is a mechanic, the other one is a driver, just blurted out some like classic 15-year-old hybrid garbage. Like, hybrids are great. They use less gas, but they use too much oil, and you don't save any money because you use so much oil.
Pardon? Okay.
And my brain did a little flip, and I kind of, so when you say that, I like, it makes me happy to think that we might be getting to a point where people are a little less afraid, a little less intimidated. But I think, oh man, we still, that's such a big hill to climb when people at this point don't even get hybrids, you know, still.
But why do they need to get hybrids? I can describe hybrids in one sentence. It's just like your gasoline car, but it drinks less. End of story.
End of story. I agree.
You know, electric cars, you do actually have to learn stuff. You know, I've written this before. I have long, impassioned arguments with friends and colleagues, but I think the real problem is plug-in hybrids, because people, to a greater or lesser extent, get that their neighbor with the Prius does everything they do with the car. It may whine more, it may look a little odder, but they go to the gas station less. Great, you know. And in the end, it has windows and lights and stereos and all that stuff that a real car has.
Right.
And in some basic way, they get battery electric cars. It's a car like a phone. It has a big battery in it, and you drive around for a few hundred miles, and then you plug it in to recharge the battery. That's conceptual. People get it because they have phones. The problem comes when you marry the two, because you go into a dealer and they say, hey, we have this car that's called a plug-in hybrid. And sometimes it's an electric and sometimes it's a hybrid. And you're like, oh, it's an electric car. Cool. How far does it go? Oh, well, it has 31 miles of, why would I want a 30-mile electric? And you've lost them.
Right.
You're done. The line that almost got a beer thrown at me among a man I really respect is that, to me, plug-in hybrids are an engineer's solution to a regulator's question that no consumer has ever asked, which is, how can we take the bulk of predictable driving and run it in zero emissions mode while eliminating range anxiety that prevents people from buying battery electric cars? No consumer ever walked into a dealership and said, hey, I want to do that. So I think plug-in hybrids are the most confusing alternative. There seems to be a view that, in fact, battery electrics are coming quicker than people thought even 5 years ago. Certainly GM decided basically BEVs were the way to go, and they were putting all their chips there. Some manufacturers are still doing both. Hyundai Kia does everything all the time, so they have some too. But
right.
I think there will always be naysayers. Your mechanic friend who's spouting nonsense about hybrids. And God knows the internet has amplified that. That said, there is a movable middle. It's kind of like politics. There is a movable middle who are willing to listen to arguments for both sides. In car buying, it's not quite so identity focused, especially if you're going to have 300-mile electric pickup trucks that will power your house for 3 days, which I really do think indicates how seriously Ford takes EVs and how smart they are, because focusing on that and not mentioning seals or global warming or carbon dioxide or any of those horrible other things is a really good way to do it. Sell it as a better vehicle, not as a solution to a problem that part of America doesn't believe exists.
Doesn't care. Right. And exactly. No. And that's talk about the charging sockets and the lighting and all of this other stuff that this car is going to come with that the gas version won't have, or at least may not have unless you buy the $100,000 version.
Well, even still, I'm not sure you can set up your, 5.7 liter diesel to run in your garage as a generator.
Let's hope not.
Yeah.
Let's hope not. That definitely, that's a Texas solution. And I'm going to leave that right out because I just lost the entire state of Texas. I'm
making notes. Hit me with questions.
Yeah, no. I'm making, so you were, this is sort of not a, but the lightning thing was really exciting to me. And I'm, for a company that has done a lot of talk and very, very little action, it was nice to see Ford come out with the Mach-E, put it in dealerships, and actually see them on the road in the wild, and then do with the F-150 Lightning what they did, which was make a really exciting product, starting at a reasonable price. Yes, that's going to be more limited than the deluxe one that everyone wants to talk about that does all the cool things. But the idea that there's an electric Lightning for $39,000, that's a game changer.
Yeah. And Ford has unparalleled understanding of the fleet market, as they will tell you over and over and over again. But it's true. And they understand the demands of fleet truck buyers really well. It's been sort of talked about among people like us that in a lot of cases, fleet trucks are some of the lowest hanging fruit for electrification because they cover predictable routes, most of which are under 150 miles a day. Many of them go back to depots at night, so
right.
You can always charge them. If you can get past the fleet owners and fleet operators' reluctance to try new things because they have been badly burned in the past by things like 2010 diesel regs. But they also understand cost equations really well, and the reduction in maintenance for an electric box truck compared to its diesel counterpart with modern diesel emissions after treatment equipment and diesel emissions fluid you have to fill it with, and so on and so forth, not to mention the regular repairs on that diesel. The electric is just a much better lifetime cost equation, and they do get that. Ford can convincingly make that case and speak in the language that fleet buyers understand because they've been doing it for decades.
You posted something on Twitter, and I think my response was, oh, please. It may have been this morning, it may have been yesterday, but we were talking about charging networks.
Oh, yes.
You mentioned your experience with Electrify America, and I want to just tease out of you what your take is on it. We've heard over and over again, that Tesla's just years ahead of everyone else with the supercharger network. And I am not going to be the guy here to tell you that's not true. I just don't think it's the immutable mountain of truth that a lot of the Tesla stands think it is. I think it's something that is a great selling point, and it's a wonderful lubrication for the sales process. But when you actually get in and start driving these things, it's not as though anything that isn't a Tesla is useless, is limited. Now, your take on that, sir, because you just did 700 miles in an ID4.
Yeah. So for the benefit of those who quite sensibly don't follow my Twitter feed, @ JOHN, V like Victor, OELCKER, I tweeted this morning a verbatim rant from a friend, edited down to 240 characters or whatever it is, who said something to the effect of, I think the solution to EV charging is for Tesla to use its enormous hoard of cash to buy every other EV charging network in the world, in America, whatever. And so that would be Electrify America and EVgo and Green Lots and ChargePoint, and I'm forgetting a handful.
Yeah, Blink or whoever.
Buy them all. And he said, operate them just the way they're being operated today, because the first electric car might not be a Tesla, but the second one damn well will be. And that, at this moment in time, in July 2021, it is indisputable that Tesla's supercharging network is most reliable, most pervasive, which is to say it covers 95 or 6% of the lower 48. I think there's some small pieces of very low populated states you can't get to, but otherwise you can travel through 95% of the continental US in any Tesla, because they all have ranges of 200 miles or more, hopping from supercharger to supercharger, or destination charger to destination charger, maybe. But it is pervasive. It is by far the easiest to use because Tesla, like Apple, owns the whole thing. They own the products that use it, and they own the ecosystem. And so they only had to deal with one thing. They just had to deal with Teslas. But take someone on a road trip in a Tesla, and the car will tell you which superchargers to go to. It will route you there, and it will even tell you how many minutes you should stay in order that you don't charge more than you need to arrive at your destination and spend more time, to arrive at your destination with something like 25% or 30% of battery. Assuming that you can charge at your destination. Tesla really thought it through, and because they control all the parts, their reliability is good. And more than that, drive up, plug in, walk away. That's it. There are no memberships. There are no credit cards. There are no key fobs or RFID tags. You don't have to call a toll-free number. And all the other networks have some variety of the rest of that. Now, I have spent quite a lot of time on the phone with folks at EV fast charging networks. I have great sympathy for them in general because they are doing a very difficult thing, which is putting equipment out there in public spaces. And just talk to the department at Coca-Cola that designs its machines to be relatively durable against all of the things that members of the public do to them. And then add in, a couple $100 of copper cable that, if you have large enough choppers, is worth something on the open market. EV charging stations, installing them in the places people go, keeping them up and running, and most importantly, making them work with dozens of different EVs from dozens of manufacturers, not all of whom play by precisely the same rules when you get down to the little bits and pieces of software, is a miserable, awful task. Nonetheless, their backers think they can make a big ton of money doing it. I have viewpoints on that too, but we'll set that aside. And as a result, they are all putting out what they claim to be nationwide or soon to be nationwide networks of chargers or fast chargers or whatnot. Electrify America has the fastest velocity because they were formed in order for VW to spend $2 billion within 10 years setting up an EV charging network because of what it did with Dieselgate. And they are increasingly the one with which OEMs, automakers, do deals, which may or may not be a good thing. But they have by far the largest number of really fast chargers, 350 kilowatt stations. And that is going to come on strong because one of the interesting things about the upcoming Ioniq 5 and EV6 from Hyundai and Kia respectively is that they can use those 350 kilowatt chargers. So they can charge as fast, theoretically, haven't tested it yet because the cars aren't out, but theoretically, they can charge at rates approximating those of a Porsche Taycan, which means that all the rest, specifically Volkswagen ID4, cannot and probably won't be able to until 2025 or thereabouts. But so Electrify America has this center in Vienna, Virginia, where they test all their different hardware on every new EV that makers will deliver to them in a covered anonymous truck and then wheel in under cover of darkness to make sure it actually plays with all their equipment. And yet, still, they don't always work. And EA has had, shall we say, major and well-publicized problems keeping the damn chargers up and running. And I have multiple times now gone to an EA site where if you have 4 charging pedestals, 2 of them have Unix code scrolling down the screen. This has happened twice since January. 2 more of them are simply frozen. One of the other 2 works, but something or other is wrong. The credit card reader is broken or something. So you have to call the nice lady. Now, Electrify America has fabulous customer service people. They are incredibly patient, and I give them gold stars. They're really lovely, and I don't want their job for anything in the world.
No.
But I have spent probably several hours, all told, on the phone with the very nice ladies at EA's customer service, standing in parking lots, sometimes in the dark, sometimes in the cold, trying to get the chargers to work. I would estimate that 1/3 of the times I have tried to charge on EA, for whatever reason, it hasn't worked. Sometimes it's just moved to another cable. Sometimes it's that simple. These things will get better. I am encouraged by the fact that one of the major automakers that I have talked to that has an electric car in the market now has a group of people who do nothing but monitor every failed public charge event for that car. And they look at them and they look at what the network is, what the location is, what the charging equipment the network is using. And then they have a little chat with the network if they see patterns. And this automaker claims that since January, they have cut the rate of unsuccessful first charge attempts by 2/3.
Wow.
By, among other things, so here's a story. They wouldn't tell me what network. I think I know which one it is.
Yeah.
They noticed that the car was just barfing at a particular network's locations, but only certain types of equipment. And so they called the network and said, you have a problem here. Our car plays by all the rules. Your equipment is not. And the network said essentially, yeah, we know, but unfortunately we have to go and upgrade each of those stations on site. We can't do it over the air. They're older stations. And this car maker said, great, when will you be done with that? And they said, well, we think 3 or 4 months, because the problem is we don't actually know where those stations are. We don't have the records that said what equipment we installed in what locations, with the roll up from other companies. So this car maker went on to, I suspect, PlugShare, and wrote a little program to recognize that particular piece of hardware, created a list of everywhere in that charging network where that piece of hardware was used, and knocked them all out of the car's navigation in 1 week.
Nice.
That is encouraging to me.
Yeah, very.
That is one car maker that I think understands the importance of getting on the road charging right. Because every time that you or I tweet about a bad event, people see that. You just don't get that with Teslas. So I don't think I've ever seen a tweet about this Tesla supercharger is defunct and I'm stuck. Sorry, go on.
No, not at all. I mean, so let me throw this up and you can smash it back in my face.
Supportively and empowering.
That's okay. When I was growing up, my family took a car vacation every year. We piled all the kids into the station wagon and we drove from Wisconsin to Florida, or you name it. We did it. I feel like those of us who are involved in whether it's activism or journalism or whatever, we get very, very, and not unjustly, but very, very hung up on the supercharger network is amazing and it's everywhere and it works and it is all those things. But that the idea that everybody needs all of that charging infrastructure all of the time misses the point. In other words, if your family vacation is screwed up, you're pissed. But there's probably 51 weeks of the year that maybe you were just charging at home or at work or somewhere else where you live in your daily thing, and you didn't have any problems.
Factually, you are completely correct.
But
it is also completely irrelevant.
Fair enough.
Because no car maker ever sold a car by saying to someone, what you think you want is wrong.
Right.
You don't need what you think you want. And because most people don't understand that they will do the bulk of their charging at home. And I did an article recently that said, actually, new car buyers now, which is where the bulk of EVs will come from over the next 5 years, many more than what's on the roads now, new car buyers are now so affluent compared to America at large, because new cars are so expensive, that 4 out of 5 of them have dedicated off-street parking where they can charge, which is much greater than the number for American households at large. Not to denigrate the problem of multiple unit dwellings, but the new car buyers, most of them will charge at home. But none of them have gas pumps in their garage. They don't get it, and unless they can live with an EV for 2 or 3 days, just telling them you won't go to a place to charge except when you're on vacation, truly, or maybe visiting grandma. But, you won't go to that fast charging site that we just spent 10 minutes telling you about, except under a limited set of circumstances. They can hear you, but they won't necessarily absorb it. They will over-focus on public charging infrastructure and under-focus on, the $700 thing that hangs off the wall of their garage that they take 5 seconds and plug in every night. So you're entirely right on the statistics, but it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. John, that might be my epitaph right there. He was right, but it didn't matter. You know what? We are running out of time.
Oh, good God, we are.
I said I didn't want to talk a lot about the big T, but I do want to talk about Tesla a little bit. We certainly talked about supercharging. there's so many places I could go, whether it's the Delaware trial, whether it's how old the Tesla models are and how that's going to impact them as other companies now, as we start to see Rivian and Lucid and Ford and GM come out with more cars, more interesting vehicles. I don't know. Where do we start, John? What?
I haven't followed the Delaware trial, although the headline where Elon Musk said that Tesla would collapse and fall apart and die without him was an interesting data point.
100% true.
I can't see your irony emoji there.
It's not. I totally agree with that.
Really?
I totally agree with that.
So number one, who's the designated successor if Elon Musk gets hit by a bus? And number two, when will Tesla be sufficiently adult that it could actually be run by someone else?
Never.
Well, that's a problem.
Yes.
Because remember what happened to Ford? It almost bankrupted itself when Henry Ford insisted that all America ever wanted was the Model T. And then they stopped producing cars for 18 months in the changeover from Model T to Model A when they finally arm twisted him into updating a car that was at that point 15 years old. But that's all I know about the Delaware trial. Their model lineup is aging. Tesla stands will counter immediately and indignantly that the car is changing all the time because of the over-the-air updates, which to some degree is true. And whether or not people who haven't bought Teslas yet understand the importance of that, especially as other makers are sort of lurching slowly into over-the-air updates themselves, albeit not to add cool things and fart noises, but, more sort of safety fixes or tweaks to the offerings, or increasingly decommissioning things that you're not willing to pay for anymore. But, Tesla does not appear to have new volume models on the horizon. The two that are important, and I don't see the Semi as important, frankly, nor is the Roadster.
Nope.
But the pickup truck or Cybertruck that is coming may be important, but it is so different from a standard pickup truck that it is more a personality statement than a functional pickup truck as people understand it. I think Rivian was really smart to make a truck that looks like a truck. There's some question about the dimensions. And Ford was very clear that some portion of its F-150 buyers were completely open to an F-150 powered by batteries and electric motors, as long as it stayed an F-150. They wanted it a little different, but only a little, and it had to be and say F-150. So truck buyers are incredibly conservative in their vehicle approaches. So the Cybertruck, especially if the rumored volumes of sort of 100,000 or less are true, the Cybertruck may be not a volume model for Tesla. The Austin plant is really supposed to be more about more Model Ys. Is there a point at which the Tesla market reaches saturation because there are lots of people who will never consider buying a Tesla? That has been posited several times. Hasn't happened yet. They keep selling. But I do worry a little bit about their models aging, and it appears that where Model S is going is basically ultimate performance, which is great, but there are going to be a lot of people who want something more Mercedes S-Class. Mercedes now has its own electric S-Class, the EQS. I got a ride in a Lucid, which is a lovely car, and I hope they get it into production. And so, we'll see where Tesla goes, but it's not immediately obvious to me what the company looks like 3 years from now. There is talk that they will do a shorter, smaller hatchback for Europe. That might be an interesting and inexpensive way to come down in the price chain a little bit. So, but, unless they spring a surprise on us, I'm not seeing a whole lot in the next 2 or 3 years because some other things they're building factories. So.
Going to be doing something in all those factories, right?
Mm.
So far, it's not making 4680 cells. It's, I don't know. That was my snark for the day. Do you think Tesla is ahead of everybody else?
Define ahead.
You define ahead. No, I mean, and whatever. So we'll agree. Well, let's stipulate charging network. Tesla's ahead of everybody else. Is it an insurmountable lead? Absolutely not.
I would say Tesla is ahead of others in general EV efficiency. I've had this argument recently with a number of people, including a short seller who became so irate that he blocked me on Twitter. My heart was broken.
Oh, John.
But, there is question about, do Teslas actually achieve in real life their EPA ratings versus other EVs, which may be more conservative on their EPA ratings. But I would argue that by and large, in every facet, Tesla really understands how to engineer every part of the car for efficiency. And what sort of put me on this track was Lucid. Peter Rawlinson, the CEO of Lucid, was the chief engineer for the Model S. Right. So he gets designing electric cars, and he really hit home on efficiency. The anecdote they tell is, we actually patented a new design for a gear tooth for the final drive that it has less friction, which no one had ever looked at, because in a gasoline vehicle, the friction in the teeth of your differential is not even relevant to how much energy you waste. And the fact that Lucid claims it can get over 500 miles with 117 kilowatt hours or something indicates that there is a lot of opportunity for efficiency, that those companies launching their first EVs out of off-the-shelf parts basically are not understanding and don't have the backstory for. So I would put Tesla ahead not only in the supercharging network and, more importantly, experience, the frictionless nature of it, but also in sort of having more experience in designing high-volume EVs for efficiency compared to everyone else.
I wouldn't even argue with that. And I'm a fairly well-known Tesla hater, allegedly. Allegedly. I just, okay. Well, I don't.
So what was your most surprising news story of the past week? What really sort of rocked you back?
That's a really good question, John. And you know what? I don't know. This Delaware trial's pretty both shocking and totally not shocking. That's probably the thing that sadly is taking up most of my brain activity.
Wow. Okay.
I know.
Give me a quick rundown, since possibly many of your listeners haven't been following either.
Yeah, no. And I would love to sum it up, but to say honestly, this is nothing new. This is the lawsuit that the Tesla board of directors settled 2 years ago, last year, for $60 million. That says that Elon pushed through the Solar City sale to his own benefit, to the detriment of Tesla stockholders.
That seems pretty clear to me, but
it honestly, it seems painfully obvious to me that it was a personal bailout, that the board fought him on it. And then they relented when he pushed harder, because in the end, it's his company, as I suggested earlier. And right or wrong, they let him do what he needs to do. So he needed to bail him and his cousins out, and he did. I don't know where the trial is going to go. I really don't know. I don't have any suspicions. I guess the not surprising thing, or the surprising thing, is that this all seems like testimony we've heard before in other Tesla cases. It's nothing new. Wow, Elon rage fires people. Really? Wow, nobody'd ever heard that before. Oh wow, Elon's kind of mercurial and a little eccentric, and maybe, yeah, really. It's sort of that kind of stuff. So I'm both fascinated by it and repulsed by it, which kind of describes my relationship with Tesla in general. Like I used to love them, and I love the idea that there's a big, strong EV car company. I love that. I just wish it wasn't run by Elon Musk.
I have versions of that feeling as well. We're probably going to replace our aging, decrepit, but Woodstock, New York appropriate Subaru Outback sooner or later. And it's really time now. The better half has grudgingly accepted the notion that we're going to have a battery electric vehicle, and he will need to learn to charge. Well, yeah, but also he has sat with me in test cars in those dark, cold parking lots with me on the phone to the charging network. So and one of the discussions we've had to have is, look, the Model Y has the best range, it has the best charging network, but are we Tesla owners? And it's a complicated discussion. 3 years ago, I wouldn't have had any question about it because there weren't alternatives, but also I have become, and this is probably, the penalties of being a writer on a topic that makes people passionate for too long. I'm just tired of Tesla stands.
Yeah.
You would think that big oil really was circling the wagons, sending in black-clad snipers to surround their houses. The company's profitable now. Dial it back, boys. But it's at a certain point, it stops being rational. You tried to point out something entirely rational, and I said it didn't matter. And it starts being faith. And faith is not subject to provable fact or rationality.
It's as boring to me as arguing over sports teams. New York's better than Pittsburgh,
yay.
Right? And I just, that's not my thing. And I get it that some people love that, but the idea of like taking to your grave that you're going to be a Chevy person forever. Really? No matter what they do? I mean, you don't like this or that, you know what I mean? Like that sort of tribal identification thing kind of.
Well, I also think it's a very boy thing. Boys tend to want to assign to groups. Women, as any good long-term car salesman will tell you, are the far more practical half of a male-female couple, and generally the decision maker. I keep waiting for that notion where the smart half of the couple says to the other half, dear, so this car is within $3,000 or $4,000 of the one you want, but I never have to go to a gas station. We can plug it in overnight, and the cost per mile is a quarter that of gasoline. I think that's a better choice, don't you, dear? And on that note, thank you for having me as always. It's a great pleasure. We could do it for hours and hours, which might not be good for the planet, but
no. But anytime, John, I hope to drag you back into a situation like this very soon.
It would be my pleasure.
Absolutely. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, have a good evening for me or afternoon for you.
Absolutely. And before we go, I just want to say happy birthday, John Voelcker, because this show comes out tomorrow.
Thank you very much. As my mother says on occasion, on July 14th in 1789, the French peasants revolted. 170 years later, you were born, my dear, and you have been revolting ever since. Thanks, Mom.
Our birthdays are separated by 2 weeks.
Oh, are you a Cancer too?
No, I'm the evil sign that's not Cancer. And I'm not astrological at all, but every time
I don't know.
Every time people say, "What are you?" and I go, "I'm a Leo," they go, "Oh."
Oh, all right.
See, you just did it. Oh, like
no, Russell. That's the polite way of saying I haven't the vaguest clue what Leo means, but I'll try to look supportive and knowledgeable.
Well, thank you. I hope you have a wonderful birthday. My thanks to John. John, do follow John on Twitter. He's amazing. He's wonderful. And if you have any interest in cars, on top of the all other political spectrum and whatnot that he covers, do follow him. It is, John, I'm going to let you spell it out.
It's all one word, no punctuation. JOHN, V like Victor, OELLER. it's one of the many, many, many spellings of Voelcker. There's a part of me that really wishes I had been named after the O'Connor side of the family, because every American can spell and pronounce O'Connor. But at least John Voelcker search optimizes really well.
I think it's a good standalone name, and you can definitely, if you for some reason missed that, John's Twitter handle will be in the show notes. You can click on it there. John, thanks again for an incredible day, and we will hopefully drag you back on the show soon.
I look forward to it. Thanks so much. Take care.